Okay, so in the meantime, the panelists have joined me here in these nice and cozy seats. Besides the two keynotes we already got acquainted with, I also want to introduce two other panelists. On the one hand, we have Fabrizio Panozzo. He is professor in management at the Ca' Foscari University of Venice. And on the other hand, which I would have to see on the screen, hello, Josefine Hage, Deputy Director of Creative Saxony. Can we check if everything works? Can you hear us well?
Good morning and hello to everyone.
That's good news that everything works well, because my first question goes out to you, Josefine. In the course of the development of the policy manual, you advised the team, and based on your experience in European projects and also in your role as co-developer of the European Capital of Culture, Chemnitz. Can you tell us why was this strategy so important to you, and for whom was it made primarily?
In German, we have a saying that literally translates into what is written down stays. Of course, that is only true to a very certain extent, because a strategy can only a starting point for connecting people and engaging people around the common vision. That is, in a content of that policy paper that the colleagues produced in a really great co-productive manner. I think Christoph has been a great moderator of this whole process. As Bernd just mentioned, data and monitoring has been very, very crucial in the last 2 decades to put creative industry on the political agenda. But also the bottom-up networking on the level of the creative entrepreneurs and the work of the hundreds of creative industry support organizations that emerged in Europe over the last 2 decades have been essential in establishing the sector on a level that, and also on raising the political awareness that it has today. The INDUCCI project deliberately did not concentrate on the data and semantical aspect of culture and creative industry. For me, the policy paper as one of the core outputs of the INDUCCI project has several functions. Of course, it informs politics and administration, but it's first and foremost a lever to engage in discourse and to influence other strategies on national and regional level, and to really influence funding schemes and make them more fit to the needs of creative entrepreneurs. The target groups of the paper are obviously politicians, but as I learned in the last years also with Creative Saxony, it's not sufficient if you convince a few politicians about your agenda. It's always key to include policy officers within the administration, because they are your partner on the everyday working level. And that's why it has been such a key also to include the admin training within the INDUCCI project and to keep on going with these kind of activities. Another target group are obviously the networks on the European level, but also stakeholders and on the local and regional level that also have their European contacts and that can take the message further.
Okay, so it's a really nice connection already between the policy level and also the practitioners in the field. That's nice to hear. Now I ask Mr. Panozzo, if you would have to send out that message, what part of this brochure, what part of the manual resonates most with you? What part would you broadcast to the world?
Hello, everyone. I like the title. This idea that wisdom is in the places, and that much of what we talk about here happens in places and is then celebrated worldwide and globally, but it originates somewhere. This insistence that we see in the manual on the human side, on the local side, on the specificity of creativity and culture as happening in places, I think is a fundamental turn. And maybe a small contribution, but a contribution to a discourse that I think needs to be redefined, reoriented when it comes to culture and creativity and policies for culture and creativity, which reminds us, I think, it could be more explicit in the policy manual, but it does remind us that culture and creativity and policies for culture and creativity, they have an origin in a place. And that place is a place was a place with a certain type of economy at that time, within a certain phase of transformation of modern capitalism, and I'm talking about the UK of the 90s. This is where we started reflecting on culture and creativity as a driver for the transformation of the economic system in which we live. And I think that over the years, we've obliterated this origin on that place, and we've transferred quite and critically this original reflection on how that particular type of capitalism was being transformed by that type of ideology. So there's ideology, there's a vision of what capitalism was and capitalism could be that has been uncritically transferred across Europe and the world, I think, at the time. This manual, I think, does a good job in reminding us that it doesn't function like this. This is not how you transform capitalism, because capitalism isn't just one, isn't only the capitalism we saw in London, we had in London or in the UK at the end of the 20th century, or in the Northern European or American countries. We have varieties of capitalism. And in each place, in each region of this complex continent in which we are, the entrenchment between culture, development and creativity happen in different ways over time. For instance, something that we should remind, and I think that the manual does, this policy manual does, we should remind that there are, in certain places in Europe and in this project as well, creativity and culture intertwined with development and of place and business long ago, where in certain places we have centuries of profound and mutually aware connections between business, local development and creativity. In other places this happened later, and I think this is another element that we forgot for a long time, for quite a few years in the first decades of this century, and we need to go back to these different trajectories of the relationship between what we call creativity, what we call culture, and what we call local economic development. The insistence, for instance, on the elements, on the policy advice, 3.6, 3.4, 3.2, this idea of rethinking the very idea of innovation. What is innovation? This massive reliance we've had in the last few years on a narrowly defined technological notion of innovation, with this rhetorical repetition of the digital as if that was a kind of magic bullet that would solve all the problems of creativity. The going back to the human dimension of creativity, again, the locality of creativity, the idea that there is potential in places that can be discovered in a creative way. Another element which I found paradoxical in the policies for creativity in the last few years is that there was little creativity in creative policies. So to the extent that they were replicated from an origin which was remote, both not so much physically, but it was remote ideologically and historically, this replication of something that does not connect to the place reduce the level of creativity of policy making at the local level. And the additional element, which I might discuss later, is how do you become creative as a policymaker locally? Can we talk of a creative bureaucracy? This is the challenge that was, I think, left at the end. What is the role for the state? Can the state be creative?
I think the title, The Wisdom of Place, and what you just said really enforces the message that you, Mr. Fezel, brought in your presentation, that if we want to go for change and innovation, we need to look at the private, public and corporate level. So that brings me to my next question. We know you are well connected to the policy making sphere in Europe. So could you tell us how this manual fits into existing European initiatives, existing ones, but also the ones that are under development?
Well, it fits, as I said, in this trend that regions are taking up cultural creative industries as a strategy, as a part of their policy. And this has been ongoing since about 6-7 years. Also that regional development funds are opened to invest into museums and other parts. So as you know, monitoring those investments of the public sector and also influenced the policies. And I think the European Capital of Culture is another example of European policies reaching down to those local levels. But what has not taken place is this kind of inversion of the question, how would creative industries then change European policy? As the colleague just said, you know, how can a politician be creative? And on the other hand, we see that at least this new commission under President von der Leyen picked this up, because she reorganized the way her cabinet works. There are cross-sectorial or cross-DG members which are in charge of overarching topics like digitalization or like Green Deal. So they are not any longer in a DG silo. I don't want to say that a DG silo is not good having, but it's not enough. You know, it needs to be added by those lateral activities, and that at least has taken place. And then on top, the new policy initiative for the European Bauhaus is an example of how policy itself changed. When von der Leyen brought this project forward in her statement on the year, you know, I think it was 2020, there was not an existing program. And the Commission was totally overrun by the uptake of the sector, and they had to develop on a speed method quite differently in difference to what they usually do, a program. And here you could see that the Commission adapted its policy making. The making of its own policies changed. And while this was now an exception and maybe happened by accident, I think it's a good example which could be mainstreamed, and where you could say just dare it to develop your policy with the sector and execute it while you are doing it. And that's something which I found in the policy recommendation you have here, which I highlighted when you said, go beyond blueprints. Don't separate any longer research from doing, but have an interactive research, and while you are researching your object, you are changing it. And I think that's a direction we have to go.
Yeah. Well, I also think that we are already on a good way. You referred to Europe policy making, and Ms. Warszawski, I was quite impressed by the way that the CCI have already found their way into the Israel case. How many actions you could present us, how many best practices you could already present us. So that made me think that in Israel there's quite a hands-on approach. So that's why I want to ask you, what's the Israel experience with these type of strategies?
So still in Israel, the formal definition of innovation, which is a law, is only technological innovation. And all governmental funding are going only for technological innovation. And now the Ministry of Economy started a process, which I'm very proud of, to expand the definition of innovation. So there is a cross-ministry committee starting to study this direction and the meaning of non-technological innovation as a mean of moving forward, and something we cannot neglect anymore. So this is something very positive to see that they are really doing at the moment. And I must say that the openness to explore new territories of innovation and the contribution to CCI to innovation and productivity was really interesting. And in fact, we saw that in their own processes, they work on already with design thinking processes when they develop public services, for example. In the health ministry, or other ministries, when they work on how to make the government services more accessible, they use design thinking methods and sometimes design thinking or design strategy companies, but they were not aware for that. And many of the tools that we spoke in correlation to industrial companies, for example, developing a user experience in order to engage better clients or the citizens into different practices. Using gamification. I mean, gaming is not only for the gaming sector, but gamification only to motivate people to cope up with some health procedure or something like that. Video, storytelling, all those tools, they can really help developing new experiences and new services also in the government sector. Another thing that happened in the last years that is very interesting is that the Higher Education Ministry set up entrepreneurship, is funding entrepreneurship centers within higher education. And few of them are across university centers. So, for example, could be a design university together with a traditional university. So, building bridges also between academia when they really start to learn about entrepreneurial journeys. So, those things are really interesting to see that they happen. And when we talk about wisdom of the place, so I take it into the wisdom of different sector, and it's very important to be open to learn from wisdom of the other if we work with the government, so to understand what language and what data they need in order to take actions. And when we collaborate between design and digital technology, so to learn about the different languages and the different wisdoms in order to be able to work together.
Yeah. What I hear most is the collaboration. We need to look across different sectors. I hear about raising awareness because most of the time some policymakers don't even know that they're already on the good way. They're already implementing good practices and design thinking into their policies. But I also hear that it's really now time to still spread the word. And Josefine, we have the policy manual now at hand that is available to be spread to the world. What steps do you think are necessary to ensure greatest uptake?
Maybe I would relate to only briefly what Tami said, because I agree that we have to start with a formal definition of innovation. But for example, we in our region, we do have a definition that goes beyond the very technological notion, but still it's not yet reflected in the funding schemes, or not sufficiently reflected in the funding schemes, I would say. So I think that even if you have a broader understanding of innovation, there is still a lot of work to do then to really take it into practice and to prove that it really works through these kind of concepts that were just mentioned by the colleagues, through open innovation processes, bringing people also in. Fabrizio related to the importance of the space and the place. I think it's crucial that we position creative industries not as this, hype, urban, metropolitan, how to say, phenomenon, but that we also organize the transfer into more rural regions, and also allow the creatives, the urban creatives, to learn from local and regional traditions. So what is the status with the paper now? It has been shared with European networks, the partners. They made a list with several stakeholders on their national and regional politics and administration, and it's shared among these networks. But as I said before, the paper itself won't do it, right? It's, as we all know, paper is very patient, and it can only be used as a level for starting and continuing, and a dialogue, and to take the creative industries discourse really to a next level. I think we now need some sticky and snackable messages that we can convey to politics and administration. And let me maybe formulate two of these messages. Bernd already related to the new European Bauhaus initiative by the European Commission. And I think it's a great achievement that we have now the cluster 2 in the Horizon Europe program, which is the first time that culture and creativity play a role in the, in the major research and development program of the European Union. And the ECBN engaged very much in making this happen. But I'm truly convinced that we need to mainstream artistic and design thinking at the heart of both basis as well as applied research. So one snackable message could be that every research project in Europe that works on solving challenges for a more sustainable economy and inclusive society has to take artists and designers into their teams. And Fabrizio also related to the role of creativity in education. If we take seriously the notion that creative competences are key to the future of our economies and societies, then something very fundamental has to change in our education system. I perceive the education system as one of the most conservative systems we have in our societies. There are exceptions in Europe, of course, but I would say for most of the European countries, this is true. So we should aim for that. And until that changes, I think we should aim for that every child gets access to a makerspace where it can get a hierarchy-free, engaging, and emancipatory access to technologies and crafts. But you asked for greatest uptake, so what we can redo about it now? We in Chemnitz and Saxony, we take up the findings of the INDUCCI project and the manual in various ways. We put the transformative power of creative industries at the very heart of one of the 4 flagship programs of the European Capital of Culture, Chemnitz 2025. And there we directly build upon the experiences of the INDUCCI project and will show Europe how the connection between the maker scene, creative industries, and traditional companies can not only contribute to innovation, but also to social cohesion and making young people stay in the region. It will also help us diversifying our tourism landscape and making visitors real co-producers of European ideas and local traditions. At the same time, on the regional level, where I'm mostly working on, the strategy paper is very helpful when we talk to different ministries. We use the insights and ideas to inform our talks with digital agencies, with the leader regional managements, for example, and other authorities to infuse these ideas in funding and support schemes on many levels as possible.
Okay, thank you, Josefine. Sticky and snackable messages. I like the sound of that, so I want to put that one into the group again. And Mr. Fezel, I saw you raising the hand because you wanted to add something.
I was just inspired again by your plea for the artistic innovation. And I want to highlight this again, how important to understand this change also in relation to this new kind of partnerships. Can politicians be more creative? How do we relate the public, the private, and the grassroots level? And so far, a policy is designed, as we also use it in terms of blueprints, for replicable results. But here in our sector, there might be situations where you can do it just once. And this will do it. It cannot be replicated. Still, it is worthwhile doing. Still, it's an innovation. And seeing this new world we're in, with Putin, the war, with the climate crisis, we might just not have time to test and pilot for years. Things need to be done. And they need to be done quicker than before. So what does it mean for innovation in research and for policy design? And I think artistic methods are something one can learn from, this kind of one point in time innovation, which is not replicable under standardized results everywhere around the planet, that's where you usually define a lab in science research, but this is not at hand. So I think it's really worthwhile seeing this combination, artistic innovation, different policy making, and that also relates to different nudging, to different dissemination. I think you should take your manual to the Creative Bureaucracy Festival and other places where it's not about creative industries. Talk to as many people as possible which are not from our sector.
Yes, thank you. We will pass the message to the partnership. You just defined another step for us to take, an advantageous step. Do the other two panelists also have such a snack?
I don't know if in advice, but I see in parallel to government the more and more dominant role that the big companies are taking. We see it in the war in Ukraine and in Russia. They really become activists and they do something sometimes much faster and quicker than response than government can do. And I really think that creativity is part of DNA of and will be a more central part in any company. And I see there a very, if we talk about time to market, and if there is really a justification for that, so the private market can take that much quicker, and then this will help based on case studies that you will be able to prove with different companies, then to go with that to the government and then define policies around after developing the best practices with the companies. So I see that they have a real big power to move that forward as well.
May I disagree with this? Fundamentally.
Okay.
I think this is part of the problem, not the solution. This idea that the public learns fundamentally from the private, and that solutions first have to be sort of designed, implemented, marketed, extracted profits from by the good companies that become activists, and then the public follows, because the public has to learn, because the public has to implement design thinking, because the public has to behave like the private. This is not collaboration. This is what went wrong in the last 30 years. This is the last slide of Mariana Mazzucato outlining the problem. We've been thinking that partnership is a declaration of a stronger force, the market, in which real people know what to do because they're profit-oriented. They develop solutions and then they transfer that to the public sector. This has proven to be false and profoundly dangerous for our societies. We need to do the reverse. We need to ask, what can the market learn from the public, social, collective, democratic process? We need to ask that question. This is the essence, I think, of creative bureaucracy, creative policy making, going back to the democratic popular, engaging, non-profit orientation of innovation, rather than assuming that you only produce innovation if you are driven by profit and by the market. This is what I read in this necessity to rethink the relationship also for cultural and creative policies, to fundamentally rethink the relationship between innovation and public policy, bringing back the idea of democracy. Who is accountable at the end of the day for these solutions that we provide? If the solutions are invented in the market-oriented, profit-oriented sector and then transfer to the public, who can we blame as citizens at the end of the day? I dream of a world in which I can vote for the person that takes a solution on my behalf. And if this person is in the board of a profit-oriented corporation, I can't control and I can't express my view. So this is what we deeply have to ask ourselves, I think.
Okay, Mr. Fiesel?
Just want to pick this up. I think you see this change also with the Commissioner Gabriel, shifting the DG on research and innovation. I would say not away maybe from tech, but adding it around social innovation and bringing forward just a few months at least ago, it's just a very early start, saying that citizens need to be empowered to be innovators. I mean, this is all the tech language which is transferred, but it's a start in saying there are different innovators. They're not only companies, they're not only private, they're decentralized, and usually they cannot even apply for innovation funding at the European Union. So there is a renegotiation taking place, and that's why I put forward Marianne Mazzucato exactly to nudge on this and to renegotiate these levels of partnerships. And that would also mean, if you think it through, that we need a big boost of investment and of confidence on the public sector. So far, major policymakers, if from left or right, would always unite and say, less public sector is good. But I also think there we see from COVID that this is not always true, and maybe we have to be even more radical and say it's in most of the cases not true. You know, this needs to be now defined more specifically. But on the other hand, I think we don't have to be naive that all innovations which are coming from citizens are good innovations. They can fail also. So we have to, I think, you know, be more tolerant and be more ready to accept that innovations fail. If they're done by companies, and I agree with your criticism, but we also have to safeguard social innovation and citizens, they will fail also. And then it's not time to say, okay, because they fail, they can't do it, leave it. You know, in the startup scene, it's usual to say from 10 startups, 8 fail. Just imagine if a theater director would dare to say this, you know. I opened 10 theater pieces, and I know 8 will fail, they will be empty, nobody will come. He will lose his job. You know, in the cultural sector, we have to perform much better than in the startup sector.
Yeah, but this is part of the problem.
Yeah.
Why do we accept failure when failure comes in the name of profit?
Yeah.
And why aren't we able to accept failure when it comes in the name of collective good?
Good, exactly.
That's a fundamental democratic problem, I think.
I'd like to conclude that I think it's a matter of finding the right balance. Finding the right balance between providing input, listening to people, and bringing together all these initiatives, and that we, as you have to say, allow the trial and error to take place, especially as you said, Mr. Fiesel, and that's why what we started the conference with is that Europe is changing, is challenging, is facing a major challenge, and it needs quick responses, quick solutions, and cultural and creative industries can help in that. In that phase, if we allow them to go for it and to maybe fail once, and that's also a message I think we should send out to to the policymakers. And with this message, I hope everyone is okay with it, because I have to close the panel talk now. And so the viewers at home, I would like to welcome you in 15 minutes, and the people here in the room, we offer you some coffee and water, and take a 15 minutes break, and then we will be back.